This tape is produced in the spirit of S.A.'s 12 Steps to Carry the Message. Members of the Fellowship should bear in mind S.A.'s 11th tradition regarding anonymity at the level of press, radio, TV, and films in the use of this tape. Anonymity to this extent is actually the practice of genuine humility. Humility, expressed by anonymity, is the greatest safeguard that S.A. could ever have.
My name is Dennis. I'm a grateful recovering sexaholic.
Hi, Dennis.
Through the grace of God, I've been sober since 5/24 of 1990. Please join with me in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Good morning, I'm Bernie. I'm a recovering sexaholic. And I would like it if we could just take a moment of silence, and then I'd like to say a short prayer to open this meeting. Dear God, we praise you for your greatness. We praise you for the miracles that you have demonstrated to us. We ask that you would be with us here at this time to speak through these panel members, that we would hear your will for us, that we would know that your holy presence is here. We just praise you for all the things that have happened this weekend here. Please be with us. Amen. Many times I've used the AA Big Book, and sometimes I get in a panic and I try to find something, and over and again I've looked up in the table of contents to try to find the 12 steps. I don't think it's an accident that they're not listed either in the appendix or the table of contents. They happen to show up on page 59. And I think part of that is sometimes I tend to look at the 12 steps as a list, and I think what we're being told is that the 12 steps are part of the whole. The more that we can make our lives integrate these steps into our lives, the more we become what these steps are about. On page 60, it talks about step 3, where we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understand Him. So what does that mean? Well, many of us said to our Maker, as we understand Him, God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy power, Thy love, and the way of life. May I do Thy will always. Yeah, I'd like to ask Debbie from Detroit to come up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Debbie, and I'm a very grateful member of S-Anon. And this is supposed to be a spiritual panel. And just to let you know, those who have seen me at conferences before, I'm in a different place this weekend than I was 6 months ago in Rochester, New York. My mood this weekend is not as bright and cheery as it was then, 6 months ago. I came here with a lot of sadness this weekend. There have been some big events in the last few months that have really impacted me. And even though I come here with a lot of sadness this weekend, I'm in an even stronger place spiritually. 12th step says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And because of that, I'm just going to touch briefly on some of the steps where I've had little mini spiritual awakenings. Because this sense of spirituality that I have today, it didn't come to me in one giant lightning bolt. Okay, it came in little mini flickers of light, flickers of hope along the way. Through people just like you here, and through God speaking through each of you. First of all, when I got to step 1, we were just talking this morning in a little meeting before this about step 1, and for me, I need to see it in 2 parts. When I stepped into my first S-Anon meeting in August of 1987, I was very quick to admit that my life was nuts, totally unmanageable, totally crazy. But that part about powerlessness, I didn't see for at least a good 6 months. My self-esteem was as low as it could be, and I was suicidal, but I still thought I had a lot of power over other people, places, and things, and situations in my life. And a good friend in S-Anon spoke about how powerlessness doesn't need to be equated with helplessness. It's not the same thing. And that was a little spiritual awakening flicker for me. That, okay, just because I might be powerless over my own craziness, over other people and their behaviors, it doesn't mean I'm helpless as far as changing something about my situation. I participated in a very in-depth step study group that actually went on for a couple years. And when we were working on the 4th step, I think that took a good 10 months. Wrote about the character defects, wrote about isolation. Actually, I didn't write about isolation. I put a big X through that section in the workbook we were using. And just about a year and a half ago, when I went to an S-Anon retreat in Chicago, I pulled out that old workbook and realized what isolation really meant. You know, I heard people come into S-Anon, and actually I heard people in SA talk about just isolating, cutting themselves off from the rest of the world, from friends, from hobbies and activities. And I thought, well, I didn't do that, so I didn't isolate. I still did things with friends. I worked full-time. Actually, for a lot of the time, I worked 2 jobs. And what I didn't realize until that, retreat in Chicago, isolation is not just a physical thing. It's an emotional thing. And I was very, very active, of course, and had friends and coworkers, but I never shared myself with them. I never shared my pain. I could listen to anybody else's problem, but I walked around as if I didn't have any problems, even though I was literally dying inside. That was another little flicker for me, a little spiritual awakening, realizing that. Step 6, that's a big deal for me. we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. The spiritual awakening in that for me was realizing step 6 is not an action step. And, like a lot of the other steps say, became willing to, we were willing to turn our lives over. We admitted that we were powerless. We sought through prayer and meditation. We, admitted when we were wrong. Those are all action things. Step 6, all we need to do is be open and willing. Don't have to do anything. And that was a real revelation to me, because I always thought I had to heal my being with my doing. I had to be doing. Before recovery, I was always doing things for other people, and I certainly learned that early on. I, was raising my mother since I was about 5, and as an adult and in my marriage, I was doing things to get approval, to be loved. I had that need to be needed, and with step 6, I didn't have to do anything. I just had to be, and just be open and willing, and let God decide when it's time, in God's time, to remove whatever or lift whatever needed to be lifted from me. I've also realized that not only has God been speaking to me through members of S.A. and S-Anon, but sometimes God speaks to me through the oddest people, and one of those recently has been my mother. I do believe my mother is one of those people, as it states in the big book, is that one of those people who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves, and therefore is not capable of very much change. But I've never been able to figure out why my mother is as crazy as she is. She's told me before that when I've asked her about her childhood, that, her father was getting drunk all the time, and her mother was always having nervous breakdowns. And, considering how crazy my mother is, I still thought, so? What else? And totally out of the blue, this was, about a month or two ago, that she just blurted out something about her childhood, that she didn't have a very good childhood, and I said, I assumed that. And she went on to tell me about these girls that her mother had working for her when my mother was growing up. And to make a long story short, I guess my grandmother was a madam, had prostitutes working for her, were living in my mother's house when she was growing up. And my mother said that she would oftentimes be awakened in the middle of the night to the police raiding the house. And I really appreciate that bit of history. And I was able to tell her that, I'm so sorry that those things happened and that those things went on. And it was an opportunity, I guess, for my heart to feel into her heart. Because I don't think my mother has progressed emotionally beyond the age of 2 or 3. Very, very self-centered, and can't see outside herself. So I believe that bit of information just came from God through her, because my mother doesn't talk about anything, doesn't admit anything, and that piece of history really helped. Sexaholism is a family disease. I grew up in a sexually addicted home. I'm an incest survivor, and that bit of history just helps to explain where it all came from. I don't know where it all came from on my dad's side of the family, but that piece of history helped. I was doing some reading about courage before I came to this conference, and the book I was reading spoke about how a lot of people think that courage is the absence of fear. And this book said that, courage isn't the absence of fear. The absence of fear is some kind of mental disorder. So you can all breathe a sigh of relief now, okay? If you have all this fear, it's okay. The courage means going ahead with what you need to do, with what's in your best interest, in spite of the fear, or in spite of the pain that you're probably going to feel. And through what has transpired in my life the last few months, I know that the courage is there, because I've done some very painful things that I needed to do what's in my best interest. I spoke at our S-Anon birthday meeting about just really knowing through and through, and this is a spiritual feeling that never again will I blow my own candle out. I won't sacrifice me for a relationship. I was engaged to be married, and I just broke off that relationship 4 weeks ago. And people told me, it took a lot of courage to do that. Wedding plans were made and everything else. And yeah, it did take courage. It did take strength. And, through the grace of God and having a very strong S-Anon program, very strong support system, I was able to do what was in my best interest. And another way that God spoke to me this weekend through someone else, I was very touched and given some hope when I heard Mike's talk Friday evening. Besides ending a relationship that I thought was leading to marriage, I was also pregnant, and I had a miscarriage at the end of April. And it was the saddest thing I've ever experienced. Many of you who know me are aware that I've always wanted a child. The pregnancy was a total surprise, but very much wanted. And my fiance at the time, he was there for me that day, but a week later he had difficulty understanding why I was still feeling sad about this. And what I've learned also is that I can have simultaneous feelings, meaning I can feel sad about the events that have happened the last few months, but I still know that there's a lot of joy in my life. And that's what recovery has given me. I can feel the pain, I can feel the joy, and through coming here this weekend, I can feel the hope. That's something I requested and put out there to God that at the birthday meeting that I wanted this weekend, because I know I have the courage and I know I have the strength, but I needed to go back home with a little ray of hope, and that has transpired for me this weekend. And I'm grateful to everyone who's here. Everyone from Portland. This has been a tremendous conference, and everybody from around the country. I just appreciate the fellowship. I appreciate the friendship and all the love and acceptance I've felt this weekend. And I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie. I forgot to mention something. 3 years ago, I went to treatment for codependency and also the sexual disorder, and it was about a 1 month time, and there's a lot of denial that was confronted there too. A year later, I went back to the Center for a Reunion, and I got to know the director while I was there because I'm really, really bad. I'm really special. So I got to have a little time with him on Saturday evening, and he said, "Well, Bernie, how's your recovery going?" And I said, "Well, it's going pretty well, except for the spiritual part." And he said, "Oh." that's the most important part. So that was a real wake-up call again. I'd like to introduce Gordon, our good friend from Dallas, from Galveston.
You going to give me a kick or? Okay. My name is Gordon, and I'm a sexaholic. And like he said, you know, the spiritual program. Well, my whole life was a spiritual program. I didn't know it, but I didn't start to growing until I got a spiritual experience and start learning from my mistakes. In 1960, my daddy passed away, and I figured he died of a broken heart. And I couldn't handle it. And I wound up 3 times in the strong room in the Marine Hospital. I was drowning with alcohol. And the 3rd time they wound up and sent me to the nut house. And the spiritual experience there was that all they had to do was put me in a ward with a bunch of people that didn't know one end from the other, and I could see that I was on a pity pot feeling sorry for myself, you know. And I got into the program, and I can look back on my daddy's death, and he did not die of a broken heart. He died because he retired and quit riding his bicycle. So I have a bicycle, and I ride it now, you know. It's a learning experience. I'm Mitch Kuiper's uncle, and he passed away the 27th of April with AIDS. 7 years he had it. And I'm so grateful to be his uncle because I learned so much from him. I've seen so many miracles, you know. I learned to, it's a growing experience. I'm just here now, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but as long as I can learn to enjoy today, I'm all right. I got this here down here is, boy, got to run fast here. But any time that, in my whole life, I got a bunch of list there. Every time I got into a jam, instead of having a spiritual experience, I changed my attitude. You know, like I wound up in the strong room, and the psychiatrist told me, he says, find yourself a good girl, and you're not going to find her in the beer joint. And I said, well, I'm not looking for a good girl. I said, she has to be bad, or I won't have nothing to do with her. And he said, well, you better change your attitude. You're going to wind right back up here. So I made all the bad girls good, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And when I shipped out and went to sea, I didn't have that guilty feeling of doing anybody any harm. But it was the wrong course, you know. I sobered up in July 10th, 78. And they asked me, interviewed me and asked me if I'd be willing to bury my mother. And I said, well, my mother's been dead for 9 years, you know. And that was the most intelligent question anybody ever asked me. Because all my core belief systems come from my mother. And I come to find out that she was God. That's why I couldn't accept God. And once I got that out of the way, I was at a meeting the other day, and a fellow had lost his mother. And they had their life support system. They had to cut it off, and they backed the daddy up on it all, you know, and he's crying. And then come my turn to share at the meeting. I said, you know, a person isn't dead until they're forgotten. I said, my mother's here right now with me, you know. I don't know what happened to all the resentments and all the anger and all this, but it's gone. I had to get rid of that. And because I can see that, well, I knew that, never mind, I know a lot of things. She lost her daddy when she was 13 years old, and then she married my daddy, and she's jealous, possessive, domineering, you know. And I was my daddy's favorite, so I was on her list all my life. I could never do anything right. But it wasn't her fault because she didn't have a program, you know. See, I found the program, and all I have to do is take my mother's inventory, and I've got mine. It's beautiful, you know. I got a lot of work to do. I was 47 days in the treatment program. And while I was there, the spiritual experience, I was there 3 weeks, and I got a 3-day pass, and I went to a young people's meeting. Now, I don't know what took place in that meeting. I know now what a lot of people like you was honest about themselves, and I felt part of. But I woke up the next morning, and I'm singing a song, and I'm all alone. And I heard it described later that I woke up and said, good morning, God. Instead of saying, good God, it's morning. And that has been the strength that's kept me here. And when I lose that good morning, well, then I'm in trouble. Anyway, we'll get on down here real quick. In December of '92, I lost the good morning God. I lost the spirituality of the program. I was at a conference and I started bawling, and I said I've always been part of, and I was always on the outside looking in, and I felt miserable. And I was scared to drive through Houston. I said, there's something wrong. That was in November. Well, December, it kept getting worse. So in December, I called the crisis line. And I checked into the hospital. But people knew about my celibacy, and I'd getting good advice from AA members. My problem was that I had to go out and get fixed and get off that celibacy kick, And I called the crisis line. I said, if I go back on any of my addictions, it'll be the same as committing suicide. And so they wound up, and I told them, all my past history and all that stuff, and they had me down charged with disillusional disorder. And they put me on antidepressant drugs, Now, this is all spiritually. I didn't want them, but I wanted to stay alive. There was something wrong. And it took them till the 15th of March to discover that, they sent me to have a head scan and CAT scan. They found out I had a brain tumor, about the size of a golf ball right here in the top of the head. And the 1st of March, they operated and removed it. But I had to get rid of that before I could get the good morning God back. But if I would have been satisfied with the antidepressant drugs that they give me, I'd be dead now. But I wasn't happy without that good morning God. And I kept complaining and kept complaining and kept complaining. But what it taught me is don't ever be judgmental of another person, because he might have a brain tumor. He might have a brain tumor. But people loved me when I couldn't. They accepted me. When I first got into spiritual experiences, that I was at a meeting when I was first, and I didn't know if I was here, there, or where, And old John Kane, he had 3 years clean, and he said, put his arm on my shoulder, and he said, that's all right, son. He said, we're all just one drink away from being a drunk. And it made me feel part of. I was accepted. Somebody accepted me. But then I started to grow, but I had to find somebody who would accept me first. And then when Neil Madlock said to me, he said, Gordon, he said, how long you been around? I says, 8 months and 15 days. And he says, he said, I think you're going to stick around long enough to find out how long it takes to have a baby. And I called him some real choice names, And he says, no, all kidding laid aside, he says, you're really grown. And I said, I don't think so. I said, I lost 50 pounds, but I haven't grown any. And he said, oh, yes, you have. He said, as much as you have grown, everybody around you has grown with you. Here's a man with 20-some years clean, And I found out I was looking in the wrong place for my growth. If I look into others to see the growth, I have it. If I can't see it in others, it isn't here. What I look for is what I get. There is no such thing as a free lunch. I had to quit being negative. I had to be positive. And God has removed the lust from my mind. I don't know. I don't know how it happened. But if lust comes in now, it's because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I go to a conference, NA conference in Lake Whitney, and I didn't want to go there. I was there the first one they had, and I was still going to sea, and I told them, if you go to sea and you use drugs, they take your semen's papers. So what am I doing there? But I was going into NA for my sexual addiction, and I told them my core addiction is sex. And you'd be surprised how many people identified with me. The only reason they used drugs was to quiet their emotions, Anyway, a few years later, I didn't want to go to that conference, and I'm down in Galveston, and that sexual urge starts coming over me, and I said, okay, God, I'll go. And then it left, And I got up there, and The topic at a men's meeting was, how many believes in celibacy? And a whole bunch of them raised their hands. How many have been celibacy for 1 year? And a whole bunch of them raised their hands. They said, how many have been celibacy for 1 year without masturbating? And I was able to tell them the bottom that I hit, and it isn't very pretty, It didn't come easy. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I reached out for help. And I got a bottle. I didn't bring it with. I got it out in the car, but don't have enough time. But a bottle with a cork, and I shoved that cork all the way. As long as the cork's in the top of the bottle, it's doing something. You're content, But when you go too far over, the cork goes all the way into the bottle, and you're hooked up in you're hooked in the snare. You go for the snare, you're in there. Now the only way that I could get out of that bottle is yell for help. And somebody over here in an SA meeting heard me, and they come along with a 12-step pennant. They said, "What's the trouble?" I said, "I got problems I don't know what to do with." And so they lowered that rag down there with 12-step pennant row down there, and I catch that cork up in that rag, and they pulled that cork right out of the bottle. But I couldn't do it myself. I was at Wichita at the conference. They had a workshop on release from the snare, and I said to the fellow, he got me to share it. I says, "Where did you get this?" He said, "I thought it'd be a good subject." I forgot the Wichita before. I'd had that bottle, and I showed him, but I didn't think about it as a snare and all this, So I says, "Well, okay, I'll see what happens." So another fellow from Chicago, Kansas City, he said, in a snare, there's a bait. And you go for the bait, you get caught in the snare. And the only way you can get released from that snare is get somebody else to release that trap so you can get out. And that's what we come here for, is to get out of the trap that we was in. But somebody else has to release that trap. We need a living example to follow. I was on a ship, and the chief engineer on there, we was sharing bits of wisdom, and I was introducing them to the 12-step program. And I sent him the one about troublemakers are our teachers, And I got that all wrote out. And he come back with a note, and he said we ought to castrate him and hang him, And I just looked at him like he was crazy, and shook my head and walked off. About an hour later, he gives me this piece of paper. Now, if I would have accepted the first thing, I'd never got the beauty here. Whether knowingly a knowledge or not, you are a servant of the Almighty. He directs all things. This explains why plus and negatives exist at all times. However, it is only natural to cancel out a negative with a positive from time to time. In this manner, a destructive force is eliminated. It can be any kind of force, And I'm going to close with this. Is it not true that we make a friend? It's not true that we destroy an enemy when we make him a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. And now we'll hear from Harvey A. from Nashville.
Hi, I'm Harvey Asher, sexaholic. Talking about spirituality as a separate topic here made me think a great deal about how can I talk about spirituality as a separate topic. Because all weekend we've been talking about spirituality. I was told many years ago there is no spiritual part to this program. It's a spiritual program. And so when thinking about talking about spirituality, I thought rather I'd share with you a few things recently that to me is spirituality. I want to start with yesterday when I heard Mike from Oregon talk about his son coming to his house drunk and stoned and yelling at the front of the yard to come out as he wanted to beat him up, and how maybe a year before Mike would have gone out and really got into it with him. Instead, this time, he went out and he held him and hugged him. And the young man's been sober ever since. Yeah. Spirituality is when I was in London last October, and I went to an SA meeting, and it was a small group of SAers, and what did they do for their program? But they read from the Blue Book. And I saw the Blue Book, and I said, I'm not going to tell these people my stories in that Blue Book, because that would be ego. And so they're reading it, and all of a sudden I start bawling and weeping at the meeting. Not only were they reading the Blue Book, they were reading someone I sponsored's story. And all of a sudden I shared with them finally, I want you to know I'm experiencing the 11th step. You know, why did I have to be the low life and do that low life living I had to do? Why did I have to do every one of those low down things? Why? Because God's will for me was that 4,000 or 5,000 miles away, someone might have their life saved from reading something that happened about me. And that was, for me, spirituality. Spirituality is when I go every Wednesday night to be with my mother who had stabbed me when I was a child. It's when I listen to her and care about her, and some months ago went and it was our Sabbath, and I went from services to her house, and she said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I just came to hold you, Mom. I have a feeling you don't get held very much." And she froze up, and I went and I held her, and she doesn't hug me or kiss me or tell me she loves me, basically, but I held her, and I said, "Bye, Mom." And the next week when I saw her and she saw me, she cried to let me know she couldn't believe I did that. Yeah. Spirituality is when I think my wife's wrong with something she said, and I can keep my mouth shut. Now, I always don't do well in that spiritual level. And spirituality is what I saw yesterday when we gave a standing ovation to Iris and Roy. It's something that I experience, not something I know. And in putting all this together, I felt I wanted to read to y'all something from Bill's story. He said, "Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all." The destruction of self-centeredness. To me, that's at the core of my spirituality. But how does one do that? How does one do that? Bill's story tells us. The 3 paragraphs before. He just says it. He says that within the day he was at the hospital, he did his steps. He took care of his character defects by acknowledging them. And then he asked them to be removed. And then he made his amends. It's that process that permits me to have my spiritual awakening. And what are those spiritual awakenings for me? It's to see God when Roy was hugging Iris. And to see God when Mike was telling us about holding his son. And it was to love my mother unconditionally. Because today she's a paralyzed woman, 82 years old. You know, she's not that woman when I was 15 who did what she did. And if she were, I'm not that boy. You know, I can see that. And how do I get the steps? How do I learn these things? Not by studying. It doesn't work that way. I once said to my sponsor, who had 29 years of recovery, gee, Cherry, when you went to AA, there were only 3 meetings a week, and I go to 12 or 14 meetings. Well, I have what you have in that quicker period of time? And he just laughed. And you know, his answer was, nope. I won't even have it after 29 years. But he said, no, it just takes time. And what does the time include? It includes letting God talk through you to me. I have to hear me through you. I had to be taught in Rochester many years ago about loving my mother unconditionally from a woman who spoke